Welcome to everyone who has joined us for this conversation on longevity and meaning. We are grateful to have you here for our virtual conversation. My name is Seth Green, and on an afternoon like this one, I'm especially grateful to say I'm the dean here at the Graham School at the University of Chicago. And let me welcome you virtually to our gorgeous campus, which is every bit this green at this moment in time. And this is just a little window into the place where big ideas are born that change the world, and where incredible people like Russ and Stephanie play such a vital role in intellectual community. Russ Eisenstat is the executive coach and co-founder of Rising Path Partners. He has a career spanning 4 decades, including pioneering new practices and perspectives that enable leaders to realize their highest aspirations for contribution, meaning, and satisfaction for themselves. He received his PhD in clinical psychology from Yale, was on the faculty at Harvard Business School, served as the founding director of the Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance, as well as the president of TruePoint, a mission-driven consultancy. And he's authored many path-breaking books and articles, including Higher Ambition, How Great Leaders Create Economic and Social Value. And his co-conspirator in today's conversation is Stephanie Eisenstat. She is executive coach, physician educator, and co-founder of Rising Path Partners. She is a certified coach, a practicing clinician, and physician educator with more than 30 years of experience helping individuals and groups enhance their effectiveness. She is a practicing internist at Mass General, an assistant professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, and has been an academic leader in women's health, chronic care management, and interdisciplinary care redesign. She is the author of many groundbreaking books as well, including The Primary Care of Women and the Harvard Guide to Women's Health. And we are going to start by having them share an opening presentation of ideas from a course that they lead called Crafting Your Next Chapter. And they're going to look at these questions of longevity and meaning. And then I'll be in conversation with Russ and Stephanie. And then we will open up to all of your questions. And I'll just share before turning it over to them for their opening presentation that Russ and Stephanie are truly beloved here at the Graham School. I get to read the surveys of former participants at the end of courses and programs here. And I'll just share that I was blown away reading from the cohort that have been part of Russ and Stephanie's Crafting Your Next Chapter. These are just a few of the quotes I pulled out. Thank you for the gift of this course, Russ and Stephanie. I can't thank you enough for this experience. You are an amazing team. I can't imagine this course taught by another duo. I love the readings and the discussion from my classmates guided so well by both Russ and Stephanie. I really learned to be patient and incremental, celebrate the successes, however small. I am also left with the realization that this is a rest of my life pursuit, and that doing this with my significant other and family involved in my most personal growth is exciting and will be most meaningful. The course was invaluable to me in identifying where I'm heading and what's most important to me as I approach my late 50s and decide where to spend my time. Those are 3 perspectives. I could go on and on because there have been 24 people in each cohort, and each cohort seems to have the same opinion of you, Russ and Stephanie. And so with that, I will take down my screen, turn it over to the 2 of you, and you can share some of the insights from this extraordinary program that you lead.
Oh, thank you, Seth. It's really a pleasure for both of us to be with you today, and it's been a fantastic journey together. And you know, what we'll be sharing is very much our experience on this journey with the students who were in this program at the Graham School these last years. And before that, we started the program at the Mass General Hospital. And it really has been, the word gift was in the first quote you shared, and this really has been a gift for us. I mean, they're just remarkable, truly remarkable people, and really it's been a privilege and an honor. So let me start, and Steph and I will maybe share a bit of the journey and some perspectives that have come out of the work that we've been doing. Let's see if this. Always the most challenging thing is the.
You got
Would this work?
You
yes.
are sharing.
Yeah, there you go. I passed the Zoom test. It's terrific. So I want to start by, because in some ways, this is both, Steph and I both have research backgrounds, and we've done a lot of large scale sample work. But in some ways, this is also very personal and very personal journeys and that people are on. And I think the work Steph and I have been doing in terms of these issues around longevity and meaning in the second half of people's lives, I think really are rooted in our own experience, as well as in the experience of the 100+ people that we have had the privilege of working with over the last years. So I want to start with my situation, my personal situation. This started about 5 years ago when I turned 65, and I had been leading the executive director of an organization called the Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance. It was a wonderful role and organization. We brought together purpose and values-driven CEOs of for-profit and nonprofit organizations to connect and learn from each other. I'd been doing that for a decade. It was really, really gratifying. But I turned 65, and I felt like it was time to pass the baton to someone else, to the next generation, and take it to a different level, and to really think about what my own next chapter would be. And I had a lot of ideas about that and was energized to move in that direction. And Steph, in some ways, was approaching a similar transition or thinking about a similar situation at the Mass General. And she had decades as a primary care physician, and she and her peers were also starting to think about that next chapter. So as I started thinking and getting excited about all the things that I might be able to do, I got a very surprising, at least to me, set of questions that people started asking me. So the first is, gosh, it must feel great to be retiring and having all that free time to sleep late and have fun, and how's your health holding out? Gosh, geez, you're 65 and, you better take care of yourself. Have you taken up golf yet? Are you thinking about moving to Florida? And it really took me aback, because I was very excited about moving into a different phase of life. But I certainly wasn't in a place where I saw this as just simply sitting on a rocking chair in somewhere in Florida, or taking the back 9 golf holes and really moving to that traditional retirement place. And as I started talking to some of my peers, and Stephanie did as well, we both realized that there was a disconnect, if you will, between how we thought about our lives and the kinds of mental models and the traditional way in which people had approached that period, that second half of life, that later part of life, and moving forward. And that really led us to ask a very different set of questions, which are at the heart of what we're going to be talking to you about today. Can we aspire to something other than just getting older? At this stage of the game, how do we fully leverage our capabilities and talents? How do we find meaning and purpose in this next chapter of our work and lives? And those felt like much more engaging questions, certainly for us personally. And what we found in this work is that those were very much the questions that a lot of people were starting to ask, and not having a lot of guidance or really thought about, well, how do you go about approaching that? Because it's not necessarily the paradigm that a lot of us grew up with. And I found even for myself, and this is something, again, back to one of the themes we'll talk about, is that inner journey, the introspective piece of this, as well as the outer journey, which is, well, what am I actually going to do? What are the steps that I want to be taking? But, as I reflected on this personally, I realized that it wasn't just the questions people were asking me externally. It was really the images that I had about what it meant to be at that stage in life. And I thought about, the people in my life, so my parents and my grandparents, And I'll just share this picture. So this is a picture of my grandfather, Sam, and his wife, Bessie, and they're in the Borscht Belt, which some of you may know is the Catskills outside of New York, and that's where people of a certain generation went both for the summers, but also truly to retire. And, Sam, when he hit 65, he truly was at a place where retirement was exactly the right answer. He'd had a very tough life. He had he delivered newspapers in lower Manhattan. He'd worked in a factory. He'd had a range of jobs. And truly, one of the great absolute accomplishments in his life was reaching the point at age 65 where he could just truly just relax and take it easy. But that was very different than the situation I was in. And it really required some changes and reframing. I'm going to turn this over to Stephanie because she had a very different model in terms of her situation and background as well. So Steph, over to you.
Thanks, Russ. And if you could pull up that next picture. So, hello, everyone. My grandmother, who was born and bred in Brooklyn and a professional artist, had to rethink her life when her husband died when she was age 60. And she did her own recrafting and started by identifying two loves, a love for art and a love for travel. And for someone who hardly left Brooklyn to go into Manhattan, she figured out quite an interesting way to combine both, and she took a leap. So here she is on an archaeologic dig in Tanzania, Africa, and she then decided to live with the Maasai tribe for 3 months and use that experience to create her art and her serigraphs and pay her way. And she loved the experience so much that she continued doing this in other countries all over the world, including China when travel opened up there. She even worked hard to learn how to speak Chinese beforehand, and Australia and Indonesia, just to name a few. And she continued to do this for the rest of her life, well into her 80s. Now, my father had a much more traditional road to retirement. As an organic chemist for a very large corporation, he retired at age 65. And when work ended, he struggled initially with the loss of identity, the loss of that structure, and the loss of the social relationships. So wherever you are on this journey, transition is really hard. It involves a steady situation ending, a lot of mixed emotions and grief, and then these new beginnings. And what helps is thinking about small steps that can help you to make steady progress. And those steps reflect one's identity. They're meaningful, balanced, more intentional, reflect your values, build on your strengths and those lived experiences. There are some interesting retirement statistics. The average age of retirement in the US for all workers has been rising from age 57 to now around age 62. And given the challenges of the economy, it's actually projected to rise closer to ages 65 to 67. People are working longer. Physicians have traditionally retired later, on average around age 68, but with the rise in burnout and the changes in the healthcare landscape, more are actually retiring earlier. And with this, we face a physician shortage. Another important trend is that we're living longer and healthier lives. Some have even advocated retiring the word retirement altogether, and instead think of this time of one's life, say age 50 on, mid-career, as an opportunity for what we call identity-based rewirement. So rewirement, not retirement. Russ, the next slide. So take a few seconds and think about what you see in this picture. Is the person young? Is the person old? Russ, the next slide. So our mental models come from our upbringing, our culture, and very much shape how we view the world and our perception of reality. In a study of 14,000 adults over the age of 50 by Nakamura and her team at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, they found that perception matters. People with a more positive attitude towards aging and higher satisfaction with aging had a 43% lower risk of dying from any cause over a 4-year period. Our mindset then about aging itself not only shapes how we see and react to the world, but also impacts our health. Russ, the next slide. So ask yourself, how are you imagining your future years unfolding? Is it an opportunity for renewal and reinvention, or is it just a slow, steady decline into old age? What are the images and role models that you have for this stage, and how are those images affecting your mindset as you're thinking forward? Think about your parents, professional colleagues, your friends. What's portrayed in the popular press, TV, and movies? What resonates with you? And what do you hope to embrace? And what do you hope to avoid? So, Russ, back to you.
So, as just building on what Stephanie has shared, this question around shift in mindset, the program we teach it talks about three things: reframing, revitalizing, and reinventing. And we'll talk about all three of those, but we start with this point around reframing because it's really key. And I just want to highlight that, if you think about kind of the way the world has been structured typically for millennium, there really has been this three-stage view of what a life was about. So, and it's sort of what I would call kind of the long plateau, right? That you've got this, on the one hand, you've got this rapid period in childhood and adolescence of learning and growth and development. And then, you graduate from college and then you're sort of in this static place through your adulthood. And then you hit 65 and it's sort of that long and slow decline kind of on the other end. And it's, nice and symmetrical, but it also, in some sense, is a bit depressing. And, that approach kind of makes good sense. Again, as Stephanie highlighted, when lifespans are relatively short, when people, the average age of when lifespans were lower. But, as Stephanie highlighted, as people are living longer, and not just living longer, but living healthier lives in ways that they just have capabilities and energy that's very different than in the past, it really shifts the frame. And it's really striking, actually, if you look at that evolution in terms of average life expectancy over the last 150, really actually over the last 60 years, since 1860. I mean, there's literally been a doubling in lifespan, which is extraordinary. And from an average of age 40 and then up to an average of age 80. And if people have good health care and so on, they can look to live into the 90s and potentially, even to age 100. And that's really a game changer from the days when, the retirement age was originally, in my understanding, sort of set as 65 because that was the average, average age of mortality. And so when people talked about pensions, it meant they didn't have to pay a lot of them because people weren't going to be around a lot longer. Well, that's not really true now. And so it fundamentally changes the game. And it changes it not just in terms of the number of years, but what a number of researchers are finding is that it fundamentally shifts the notion of the stages of a life. So we talked about 3 stages before. In fact, a number of researchers, as well as our own experience teaching the course, and also suggest that one can, at this point, really think about 6 stages versus 3. So there's that initial stage of growing up, again, which has sort of always been there around childhood and adolescence. But part of what we're finding is that as people who are graduating from college are realizing that they have such a longer life ahead of them, they're taking their time putting the pieces together. And if you look at the average age of marriage and the average age for having children, it's steadily rising. And I don't know, for folks who have kids who are in this stage, it's certainly been an adjustment for us. We have, 3 very happy children, but they're not in a hurry. Our youngest, who's 32 and is still in graduate school, finishing up their dissertation, as they put it, Dad, I'm on a voyage of discovery. I've got lots to figure out, and I want to put together a complete life and a more balanced life. And it isn't just about kind of rushing into how quickly can I move up the career track or whatever else. I'm trying to play a different game, and that's been true not just for us, but also for other people we know of that generation. And then, of course, there is that stage where people settle down and really drive intensely in terms of building career and family. And so certainly that doesn't go away. But what we're also discovering is that in that, if you will, post halftime, if you will, if you think about age 50 as halftime to a 100-year life, it turns out that there really are a couple of additional stages that are emerging. And that's been the focus of the work and the research that Stephanie and I have done. It's the focus of the course that we've taught. And the first of those is, and we'll talk in a bit more detail about each of those. The first of those, when people are still in working full time, but really thinking about how they might reimagine the work that they're doing. We call that the reimagine stage, and roughly age 50 to 65 plus. And then that other stage where people really do decide that they're moving from full-time employment into something else, which is, as Stephanie highlighted, is we've come to call rewirement. And then, of course, there is a point where ultimately you say, like my grandfather, okay, enough already. It's okay. I've earned the right to just to take it easy and retire and so on. And for some people that's earlier and some people that's later. But the real focus of what we're going to be talking about here and then chatting with Seth about and the rest of you is stage 4 and stage 5 around reimagining and rewiring. So the reimagine stage is interesting, and it's not something I think Stephanie and I were as attuned to when we started this work, but it really came up loud and clear in the work we were doing, the course we taught at the Mass General Hospital, and it's an increasing part of the group that we're working with now. And what people in this stage have talked about and have shared with us is, often they've been quite successful. They felt really good about the career they've had up to that point. But they reach a point, and it's sort of historically, people used to talk about it as sort of a midlife crisis. Interestingly, people talked about it at age 40, and now I think with longer lives, I think it's more at age 50 for that quote crisis to happen. But it's really saying, look, I'm not sure I want to keep doing what I've always been doing forever. I'd like to build on what I've done, but I feel like I have more in me. There's more opportunity to think about, truly a second act for myself. And, think about new sources of meaning and purpose. Avoid what, some folks talk about as retirement in place, that I'm just continuing to tread water, do the stuff that's been successful for me. I can continue, people say, look, I can continue to do this forever, but where does my own personal growth and development come from? And by the way, how do I start to have a bit more balance in my life? Often people in that first stage of career that truly, once they settle down, had been sprinting maybe for a decade or two and saying, look, I want to make a contribution, but I want to do it in a way that's more balanced. And And I think that's certainly a powerful stage and an exciting one in terms of people in the program. Thinking about someone in our program who'd spent 20 years building a very successful career in sales, and then deciding, look, that's great, but I'd actually like to do something in the nonprofit sector. I'd like to still work full time. I'm not want to slow down, but I want to take those skills and I want to repurpose them in a very different way. As I reflected on this for myself, after I left Harvard Business School, I'd had a very engaging and satisfying career as the president of a small purpose-driven consulting firm. And then around age 50, I think I looked around and I talked to my colleagues and I said, look, as opposed to continuing to do the things that we've done, what else is there? Are there some other opportunities, to grow and learn? And we started a research project where we went out and we interviewed purpose and values-driven CEOs in US, Europe, and Asia, and that led to creating the nonprofit organization, the Higher Ambition Leadership Alliance, that brought those CEOs together, and again, led to a next chapter. And that was truly an exciting opportunity for reimagining and reinvention. And so that opportunity for people is extraordinary. And one thing I will say, and it may be something we can talk about when we get into the discussion, is it's striking, I think, to Stephanie and I, how little companies and organizations take advantage of that opportunity to engage their people. When you think about development programs, they tend to focus very much on the early stages of career, or perhaps coaching for people who are going to be the CEO. But this huge set of people who've been successful, who are really the lifeblood of an organization, they tend to be taken for granted. And those organizations that have imagination about that and really think about how they can support people in making those transitions, my sense is that that's truly a real opportunity. The other stage, again, which we want to talk about is this rewirement stage. And one way to think about that is about moving from position to, we talk about moving from position to portfolio and platform. So from going from that full-time role, where in some sense who you are is defined by the work you're doing, to saying, okay, how can I think about, if I'm not working full-time, putting together a portfolio of activities? Some of them may be compensated, some of them may be non-compensated, some of them may be really just simply more time with family, some of them may be exploring things in your life that one might have always wanted to explore and moving forward. And thinking about how those pieces fit together. The notion of what we've come to call platforms, right? In the sense of places where you have an opportunity not just to do work, but have opportunities to grow and develop. So to give you an example, someone who is a close acquaintance, who's a lawyer, who is feeling kind of really thinking about their next chapter, started teaching about age 60, teaching in a law school, teaching in a course for law students. And the course itself was exciting and interesting in itself, but equally powerfully was that as a platform for them to begin to think about writing, to connect with a very different set of people, to open up a different set of possibilities for them. And that's one of the things we've seen in the course as well, is people thinking imaginatively about how do they put themselves in places both where they can do interesting work and where they can grow and develop in exciting and interesting kinds of ways. In doing that work, what we find for people engaged in this process of rewiring is that there's really both an ending and a beginning piece of this, that one part of the work is really working through that process of letting go. What's the timing for that transition? How do I think about the legacy that I want to be leaving in terms of the work that I've done and create meaning from the career that I've had? how do I pass the baton to the next generation and mentor. Lots of discussion in our program about mentoring and developing those of the next generation as a source of meaning. And as Stephanie touched on, there is a grieving process and a saying goodbye to a sense of identity and what once had. And then moving into that new life structure and shaping a more open-ended future. We talk about in the course the hero's journey, and as you think about the hero's journey, in the center of the hero's journey, it talks about kind of the abyss, and it's on the left side, the sense that you're venturing into kind of scary territory as you leave something that's very well known, a life that you've had for decades, and moving forward. And what we find is that there are really three challenges for people in making this transition. One is just around identity. Right? I mean, it's very easy for a lot of us through our lives to say, well, who am I? And if people ask at a cocktail party, we define ourselves by our profession, by our business cards, if you will, and the work we're doing. And so if I am no longer have that title, then what does it say for who I am and how I create meaning and in my life, both for myself and others? The second is around relationships. For a lot of us, so many of our relationships are at work, and really thinking about how do we reinvigorate those relationships with our family and with our friends. That's actually one of the wonderful opportunities that people find, which is the flip side of that, which is truly saying, look, realizing that actually relationships are fundamental to people's lives, that as Professor Waldinger at Harvard has highlighted, that it's probably the single biggest predictor of longevity is in fact the quality of your relationships. And then the final piece is just life structure. So if you're used to getting up, every morning and going to work, and you come home and 5 days and the weekend, when you wake up and you say, okay, well, actually it's up to me what I choose to do and how I put those pieces together. That's a challenge for people. And, once that portfolio is in place, you start to create that new structure, but there's truly a transition for people in terms of moving from here to there. And so, as you look across all of that and you look at those transitions that people take, what you see and in that evolution from age 50 on is both the sense of increasing freedom and a realization that I don't have to live my life the way anybody's told me to do. I have more degrees and ability to truly choose what it is that I'm going to be doing. But the other thing that people talk about at this stage, and it is an important conversation, is honestly a sense of fragility, because while on the one hand we may live to 100, it's also true that we may not. And so how long, and we look around us and we will think about our parents and we think about friends and family, and there is an increased realization that we have that this is not forever. And honestly, I think that fragility connects to the freedom, which is to say, well, how do we make it count? Because we can't take our life for granted. It's a precious gift, and we need to use that in a way that's truly meaningful. And the good news is that actually there's some wonderful research which says that we may not be able to win the Olympics when we're in our 50s and 60s, maybe the senior Olympics, but not the Olympics, and we probably won't win chess tournaments with the 20-year-olds. But in terms of what one might call wisdom or emotional intelligence, pattern recognition, some other capabilities, they actually continue to grow as we get older. And what we find in the program is that actually if people are able to access that, if they're able to kind of give themselves the gift of time and a community and a set of people around them to connect with, there's a real opportunity to take advantage of that. And so I want to leave you with a final question from one of our favorite poetesses from Mary Oliver, which I feels like a real question for everyone, really for all of us. What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And that's it.
Well, Russ and Stephanie, thank
Over to
you
you,
for a
Seth. Yeah.
presentation. And we have lots of questions in the chat, and I have a few of my own. And so we're going to jump into kind of a power round of 20 minutes of conversation with you both. So let's start with some of what you've presented. I mean, I am struck that I can get a 40% plus discount on dying by having a positive sense of aging. And so certainly that is a very good motivation to have a positive sense of aging. In my experience, one of the things that can give you a positive sense of anything is role models. And you've given us, I think, some great examples from your own role models in your family. You've also spent the last 5 years in a coaching and facilitation role with over 100 individuals that are at this stage of life and who are going through this process of reframing and reinvention. And so I'm curious if you could give us maybe a couple snapshot examples of individuals who have made these shifts in mindset, identity, or behavior. And if you can talk a little bit about how they approached their midlife renewal.
Yes. So, Seth, I will give both some examples around specific individuals and the changes they've made, but I do want to highlight, Seth, that there's also a broader set of changes that I would really highlight in the group overall, and I do think that they connect to the inner journey, right? Where across many of the folks in the program, and I do think that they fall into these categories around reframing, revitalizing, and reinventing. And let me just talk about that a bit. I think on the reframing front, I think, you know, we talked about this issue of how do you approach the stage in general, but I think the most profound change I think that you see in people is an increased sense of agency and an ability that, as opposed to being in a reactive mode, which I think a lot of us are, you know, there's so much stuff that's incoming that we need to deal with that we just, you know, your life evolves to saying, no, I'm actually going to take charge of my life. I'm going to be moving from external to truly internal. I'm going to give myself some grace to actually do the things that really matter for me in my life. And move forward in a way that feels very different. And then I think the revitalization piece, which again is subtle, and this is part of why it's hard to give a specific example, because they're really things like people realizing, as opposed to making huge external changes, it's really, well, how do I live my life? So how do I think about my relationships? How do I think about reinvigorating my friendships? How do I think about taking care of my health in a very different kind of a way? How do I think about being more present in my work and making a bigger difference? So those internal changes, those revitalization changes are really key. And then there is the reinvention piece, right? Which is where I think you can talk about specific individuals and the shifts that they've made. And those changes, I think, go from relatively small but strategic. So individuals who were, it's interesting, you know, different professions, and we can talk about this. One of the groups that's had a particularly tough time are lawyers, interestingly, in the group, because it's a very focused profession. It's got a very strong ideology that you just work full out or you don't work at all, to people finally saying, look, a couple of lawyers in the group who are saying, you know, I'm going to make that change. I really am going to make the shift from what I've been doing to what I'm to actually finding a different role and putting the pieces together. A more interesting shift, you know, someone in our class, Pat O'Brien, who is a software entrepreneur, had his own business, really said, look, you know, I feel great about the business. I feel great about what I've built. but I want to move to something else. So more dramatically, he said, but I can't do that tomorrow. So I'm going to spend the next couple of years building that next generation of people to take over so that there really is a legacy. But the other thing is, you know, what I realized is that on the weekend, I've been making pizza for my family and friends. People love it. The neighbors come over for the pizza. And so, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take my entrepreneurial spirit. I'm going to create Pat's Pizza. And it's going to be a social enterprise, and all the profits are going to go to charity and to dealing with climate change. And so I'm getting something up and going. Another student in the class, Michael Silverman, was doing work around clinical trials as a physician. He was working with pharmaceuticals. He was saying, look, I can take those same skills, but I realized that nobody ever taught me that in medical school. And so he's contacted a number of medical schools, and he started doing some work in terms of teaching in medical schools to take capabilities and to shift them into a different place. Steph, anything you want to add?
Anything to add example-wise?
I'm sorry?
Oh, any examples to add to Russ's before we jump into the next question?
I did, you know, because I was thinking about it's not always about success. It's about
Yeah,
learning. And I think about one person in our group who actually tried an approach to changing her work, and it didn't work out, but found that the work was so meaningful that with the help of the group, she was able to figure out another way to do it differently. And I think one of the key messages out here is that you're not alone with this, that there's a community of people who
right.
really want to think about this. And it's energizing to be part of an experience like this. And many report starting with a lot of ambivalence, really uncomfortable ambivalence about this stage, where they're at, what's going on, what's possible. And that after having an opportunity to really give yourself that gift of time, that you can alleviate a lot of that ambivalence and feel a lot more energy about where you're going. So I think, you know, good change can happen, and it's great when it does, but it's also the process of getting there and what you learn along the way. The other thing I want to address is one of the questions in the audience, which was about physicians and transition. And I think
Yeah,
say it's not only about physicians, but is particularly a concern is it's really hard to talk about this. I mean, you know,
yeah,
it's hard. There's no real safe environment to talk, to explore these kinds of ideas. You know, I'm thinking differently about my job, or I want a job craft, or I'm thinking I might want to transition to something, because when you start to talk, then you feel, well, am I going to be marginalized? Are they going to overlook me for the next position or opportunity? You know, will I become invisible because, you know, now that, you know, with all the what ageism is out there, that, you know, there's all these stereotypes that get in the way of our developing as human beings at this stage in life. And I think there's a real fear to discuss but talk is good. And what's even better than talk are successful actions, you know, and that they're evidence-based. So part of the journey, whether it's the course or otherwise, is to learn how to ask the right questions of yourself and not jump right in to the answer. I mean, I know, as many of the physicians out there know, you know, it's easy to jump into the solution, right? But what about just sitting back a little bit, mobilizing, engaging a trusted community and network around this with process, and taking it slow? We found that gradual change is much better and seems to work out better than if you take dramatic shifts. And one of the challenges is having the right resources. So, you know, in a lot of, as Martha had said earlier, it's not just the physician world, but in a lot of companies, there's just no resources for the common issues that are at stage. And, you know, you'll have to call me back if you want me to talk about all that's going around on in the country about innovative ways to, you know, engage this time of life structurally and to change the system to support people better. But many people tell us there just are none currently. And you actually need a plan to have a plan, right? And so this
right.
of talking about it in webinars like this and engaging your own community or taking the course is an opportunity to help with this.
So building on that, I want to just add an observation from David Brooks and then ask a question off it. So David is a faculty member at the Graham School as well, and he wrote a book, The Second Mountain. And one of the insights of that book is that for people that have been very successful, often by definition, they've succeeded by meeting external accountability metrics. And he writes about
Yeah,
how if you've done that for 30 years, you have trained, almost like an Olympian does, to meet external benchmarks.
Mhm.
And it can be very hard in that midlife moment to move from an external locus of control and incentive, where you're very used to, even though I went into academia because I love higher education, I love expanding opportunity, I'm now a dean, I have certain incentives, I want to have a good P&L, I want to be a contributor, right? And so
yeah,
I'm very much trained, and by virtue of the fact that I am successful, likely responding to these external metrics, right? How do I now reconnect at this stage with this internal locus of incentive and really ask that question, what is that purpose that motivates me? If you ask me today, I'd say I'm really driven to have a great P&L and scale what we do and send up more mission as part of this incredible university. But that's very tied to the
yeah,
institution, very intrinsic. It's hard to get in touch. And I think that's something that you spend a lot of time in is how do you pause from that
yeah.
mindset so that you can take in this internal locus at this point of life. And I want to add a question now to that statement. It comes
Okay.
from in the comment. And it's, your thoughts in addition to that on the role that physical and mental health play in the rewiring phase and how to think about that as part of the inner journey potentially. And Russ, you're leaning in, so I'll start with you.
So, one of the things that's interesting is we live in a really individualistic culture and world. And so it's, part of, I think, Seth, the other sort of assumption we all grow up is, well, okay, I've got to do it, right? I mean, you're the
Right.
dean, you've got to sort of make it happen. And, I've got to get tenure and I'm going to do it as my publications. It's sort of what that's all about. And I think one of the things, really the secret sauce in our experience is community, and connection and realizing you're not alone and the validation for that. I mean, it is so interesting to see in the program people saying, geez, is it really okay? Is it
Yeah.
really okay if I just spend more time, actually being with my family and actually maybe having some fun in my life, but still do things that I don't have to do that? And people say, yeah. And so I think that piece of it, and there is a part of it, which is I do think you get more comfortable in your own skin, as you get older and you realize what your capabilities are. But I think that validation is enormously helpful. And, one of the things that we talk about in the program is making that shift to realize it's not all on your shoulders, that
Yeah.
engaging with your significant other, engaging with the other people who are important to you, to really feel like you're actually making that shift in identity and in values, right? And kind of how do I define what my self-worth is in a way that's validated by other people that you care about, really, really matters a lot. I think that, the physical and mental health piece, I think is another part of it, right? Which is that, often people just put their own taking care of themselves last. I mean, it's interesting, not telling tales out of school, but, even at the Mass General Hospital, when you're dealing with physicians, particularly people who are purpose driven, you're so oriented towards that external piece of things that actually creating the time to take care of yourself. One of the things we talk about in the course is, put your own oxygen mask on first, right? That you need to be taking care of yourself so you actually can take care of other people as well. Yeah, Steph, what would you add?
I do. I have a couple things to add. The other, I think, thing is that we tend to focus on what went wrong in our lives. And, and under certain circumstances, that's actually quite helpful. So if you're a physician thinking about what went wrong or might go wrong, it helps to avoid medical error. So that's good. But in this circumstance, examining what went right is particularly helpful and can highlight strengths, individual coping and problem solving strategies, that internal journey that worked for us and we can and continue to work for us and actually helps us build our life going forward. I also think, again, you'll have to invite me back, Seth, if you want a whole webinar on preventive medicine and lifestyle medicine and how we can stay healthy for our and increase on longevity. But I think what's important to remember is it's not biologic years. And a number of people have made comments and we apologize if, we too, Russ and I need to learn how to change our wording so that it really does reflect what is, the growth that's going on at this stage. But it's not about biological years. We need to live well, active, connective, and healthy, and prevent the diseases that we can prevent. And how do you do that? Well, there's a tremendous amount of work now in research on preventive strategies we call lifestyle medicine. The pillars of keeping yourself healthy turn out to be within arm's reach for a lot of people, more than they anticipate. And even if you've got the social determinants that might be getting in the way, there are ways to creatively think about how to stay healthy.
Well, so I just want to reinforce, Stephanie, what you said about looking at those bright spots. We have a comment from Len Rothman in the chat. I have found, based on my own reinventing, that I had clues early and earlier in my life. My trial and error process did make those visible clues once I was truly on the road to reinvention. And I'll just mention that alongside the incredible Crafting Your Next Chapter opportunity, we are going to be launching this autumn something called My Life Studio, which is a collaboration between a longtime Booth professor, Harry Davis, another professor at Booth, and then the longtime artistic director of our core theater. And the studio is all about learning from the characters across your life as you enter a next chapter and thinking about what characters you want to bring forth. And it actually involves a lot of rehearsals of those different experiences in life as a way of reflecting on and thinking about those characters. But I think that idea that you can learn a lot from those bright spots, moments where you felt purpose, moments where you felt energized, and now with that freedom that you have alongside the fragility, you can lean into those. I'm going to combine a few questions that are in the chat. We got a question about how men and women may approach this differently. Obviously, it's not based just on gender, but that may be something that on average has some influence on how people think about this chapter. So curious about your thoughts there. But relatedly, I think there are a lot of questions about how you might approach this question of external value and validation. People are saying in the chat, yes, I understand that I'm not going to just be extrinsically motivated at this stage. At the same time, I do care about how I'm externally viewed because that's also my platform, my ability to accomplish things. And so in some ways throughout all of our life, we are always navigating this duality of extrinsic and intrinsic, and we're trying to come together on those. Is it fair to say that what's happening at this stage is potentially that even though both are material throughout all of our lives, earlier it might be extrinsic has a slightly stronger emphasis. And as you get to this stage, you're balancing the other direction. But I mean, you both are probably still thinking about, how am I going to have a platform like the Graham School? How am I going to contribute? And so you're still navigating that, but maybe the balance is changing. So I know those are two separate questions, but in some ways I have found that it may be on average, men almost need more of that external validation still at this stage in my anecdotal conversations. And so there may even be balancing acts that are influenced by different factors in life, but I'll turn it over to you as experts on this question.
Steph?
No, you go, you start.
So, yeah, it's tricky. I mean, it's, getting into generalizations about differences in gender and so on, I think it's just very difficult. But I will say, that it is true that our experience is that on average, in some ways, let me put it this way. I think there's a real difference between people who've had very defined careers and positions and more traditional roles and those who haven't, right? Whether they're male or female. I think on average, more women have had less traditional careers than men. But when you look at men who've had less traditional careers, and I think that, you know, what you see is that for people where it really is around a position and the growth and being in a hierarchy, that's really tough. If you've been in a position in a profession where it really is always been more of a portfolio, or you're raising kids in your home, but you also are doing something part-time, you have more experience putting the pieces together. And in some ways, some of the women in the program actually say, look, you know, for me, this is not about going this way, it's actually going this way, right? That, you know, now's my time because I'm no longer as involved in child rearing as I was. Also true for men, but I'm just saying on average, that's the case. And so I do think it's part of this is about learning different kinds of skills and also different sources of validation, right? I mean, and so I think for a lot of people, you know, is the validation coming from what my income is, or the validation coming from the contribution that I'm making to society? And, you know, a lot of the senior executives that I've worked in the for-profit sector, the ones who've made the best transition and feel best about them, it's not like they retire, but they really move into the social sector. I mean, and I suspect, you know, you see that in LSI, right? As people are still achievement oriented, but it's more on maybe in a different dimension than has been kind of true in the past.
Stephanie?
Steph? Yeah, what?
I think the way I think about it is that there's a diversity of history and gender, culture, where we're from, what our childhood experience have been. So for some people, trauma, a lot of things that fold into diversity of history. And part of it is getting in tune with who you are and how that has affected what you want to be or what you want to do in your aspirations. But it's also about, you know, groups finding their similarities so that they can support one another. And so, you know, what we find happens in these groups that come together is that the women can define perhaps a similarity that has happened within a lot of their career trajectories. I mean, Russ points out one of them, which is a lot of them are just getting started in their later life, you know, and vice versa with men who have maybe been on a more traditional path. You know, what happens with social relationships and how can I find support with a new environment that's doing that? So I think we tend to stay away from, you know, the stereotypes of what could be out there, including ageism, and let's start from the core, you know, your diversity of history and how we can find similarities that can enhance your thinking around things, and then to embrace our differences so that we can learn, because what we found in the course is the different perspectives are what leads to the aha moments and the movement.
So we are at time. I'm going to ask you a 30-second power round each, because you are a couple who has been navigating this together. And we have a number of questions about how do you bring your spouse on this journey with you? If you had to give the snapshot answer to that question, which you've done yourselves in your own life, as well as now advise many others, what's the quick and dirty on how to bring your spouse along with you in this journey?
Be curious. Ask questions. You know, we actually run as one of our sessions where we in the small group, you're only allowed to ask questions. And a lot of folks, as they've been experiencing this course, do take it home to not only their spouses, but family members. Maybe there are different conversations you have with friends and colleagues and your kids and such. But I would say that one of the keys to learning, and especially learning from people close to you, is being curious about what you could possibly learn. Russ?
And be vulnerable, right? I mean, it's a funny thing. It's just having the conversation, and it was exciting. Stephanie and I discovering, gosh, we're dealing with the same issues, right, in different contexts. Isn't that exciting? And wouldn't it be better to do it together than each of us on that separate path? And that's pretty special. and she's pretty special.
Well,
The other thing is you choose somebody who's really great. Like,
well, that is a very beautiful ending. I will say, Russ and Stephanie, that every time I talk to you that night when I'm brushing my teeth, I am often talking to my spouse about everything I've learned from you and asking that question, what does this mean? How are we going to handle this stage? So thank you for being such a wonderful part of our lives, and thank you for being such a wonderful part of our intellectual community. We're grateful to have you as instructors. And as you can tell by the chat and by the many people that have filled out surveys over the years, you are beloved by our entire community. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you, and we'll be in touch with everyone. We know there are a lot of questions about the program. We'll make sure to send that out in the follow-up. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Thanks again to Russ and Stephanie.
Thank you.
thank you.
Everybody out there.